Well, let's get started. Good evening. My name is Bill Carey. I'm a county commissioner here. Commissioner Evans is in the audience, and we're expecting Commissioner Curtis very soon. Thank you for coming out on this bit of a wintry evening. By way of background, I'd just like to let you know, for those of you who haven't sort of heard how the county's efforts to serve county residents has evolved over the last year or two. In 2006, the Missoula County Commissioners created our Rural Initiatives Office to help identify land use issues in rural areas and to encourage public participation in discussions about those matters. One such topic of discussion is, of course, the possibility of a four-season destination resort development in western Montana and all the impacts, both positive and negative, that such a change brings to a community. Tonight, we're extremely fortunate to have with us an individual who has worked with the resort industry, the public, local government, and development and business communities on an international scale. Myles' Rademan's experience includes affordable housing, open space, tourism promotion, mass transit, impact fees, tax law, and large-scale resort development. But perhaps most valuable is his experience in a rapidly changing West, where a global economy is driving change across the landscape, as well as how local communities have best prepared for that change. Myles Rademan has been the Director of Public Affairs in Park City, Utah for better than 20 years, I believe. So, please welcome Myles Rademan.
Thank you. Maybe we get everyone comfortable. We have chairs here. We can pull around too if you want to sit in some of these chairs. Well, this is great. I haven't seen a crowd this large without offering food ever. Folks are going to have to turn out. That's wonderful. I'm going to go through a slideshow where I try to answer some of the issues that I think that are on your mind. And then I'll be happy to open it up to questions and we can just talk about things. And we'll go from there. Let's see. How's that? I don't know if you turn out any more. It's like people nodding off here. Can you all see from this end too? Great. I'd like to start at the beginning. So here's a picture. Here's a picture of creation. I'm going to cover a lot of territory in a short period of time. 4.5 billion years later, the Earth, Montana. Okay, we covered the first 4.5 billion years of life. And now we can get down to business here. You know, for a long time in the resort business and most of our lives, change came very slowly. And I think it moved almost at what I would call a glacial pace. Things were understandable, they didn't happen very quickly. And then, sort of in a blink of an eye, we were swept over with this tsunami of change when everything started to change and where we became pretty confused by all that was going on. So I kind of grew up in Colorado and Utah in the West. I understand the issues I think that you're facing here, and I understand that you feel that the traditional culture and traditions are being besieged by all the growth that you're seeing, all the changes that are taking place. And I think, you know, we're here tonight to talk about some of the looming kinds of development that you see happening and what it might mean and how it will impact your life. As I read through some of the material, well, it was actually a lot of material that was sent to me and I read through it, it was pretty obvious to me that these are some of the issues that are on people's minds. The domino effect, how does it affect not only the development where it takes place, but the outlying communities, and how does that ripple out, and how does that affect all of your lives, even if you're not at the epicenter of where this is going to take place. Certainly the economic and demographic impacts, what it's going to do to the natural resources, transportation, the different seasonality, culture, political changes, and people keep bringing up the issues of global warming. I think those are interesting issues to talk about. We all, as we face these kinds of things, have a series of fears and concerns. Some of those are the same, but essentially they boil down to how do we cope with change? How do we see it? What does it do to our self-image? Where we fit into the scheme of things, the values that we hold dear. what do we do about all the financial implications of this? You know, the long-term capitalization, the investors, so forth. And then again, the loss of the traditional values, the aesthetics, the urbanization. I just listed things that I think are important to you. Many people are concerned about when we have developments, and I'm not just talking about this one development, but I looked at a land ownership map of the county, or Missoula County, this morning, and recognized that there's a fair amount of private lands here, all of which could be developed. And what does that do in terms of loss of access and recreational opportunities that you have? What does that add to the recreational opportunities? Certainly the disparities of wealth that come with the kind of growth, environmental and so forth again. I know that when that magnitude of change is confronting you, that all the signs seem to be pointing in simultaneously different directions. And so it's confusing as to what you do with it, how you react to it, who's telling you the truth, who's giving you the straight scoop, you know, what does it mean? I think you're often like this man crawling through a desert here, you know, he sees, thank God, a panel of experts. So we tend to turn to others, and I'm not trying to put that down since I make a fair living consulting on these things, but the reality is that we have a saying that a consultant is a man who knows 10,000 ways to make love, but doesn't know any women. And I think there's maybe some truth to that. Yes, a lot of different people who all do have expertise, but I'm not sure they can give you all the answers that you're looking for. So I just wanted to say why I'm here. I think you all heard the old saw of, if you want to see the big picture, you have to get outside the frame. That's what I can bring to you. I can bring you perspective. I can bring you the perspective of having worked in this with resorts and resort communities for the past 36 years. What I can't give you is the second part of this context. The context of your culture and how you feel about all this, that's yours. That's personal to you. Without living in this area, I can't give you that. So I'll try to give you perspective, the context you have to take away from it and ask questions and decide what you think about it all. I think it's always interesting. I try to bring what I call reality therapy to these discussions. And what I mean by that is the ability to look clearly at the issue and try to strip away some of the emotional content of it and just talk, straight talk. I don't have a dog in this fight, let's say, and I can talk about it like I do. I think there are things out there, you can make your own list, I just made a list here, things that are just difficult to change. The topography of the area is difficult to change. Private property rights, things we believe in. The fact that there's aging baby boomers out there, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Road systems, the fact that it costs a lot of money to build infrastructure. And I listed things, federal laws and migration and workforce housing. And attitudes and perceptions are very difficult to change. And I understand that. So I think it's important that we recognize that there are many things out there that are either difficult or even impossible to change. On the other hand, there are things that can be changed. And development codes, regulations, and requirements can be changed. These are not infallible. They're not cast in concrete. Transit parking options, open space, tax policies, intergovernmental cooperation can be changed. And I put the same thing that can't be changed down here under can be changed. Citizens' attitudes, understandings, perspectives, and expectations can change, but they change slowly. And it's painful. These are painful changes. I like to quote Reinhold Niebuhr, God granted me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think that's sort of where the rubber meets the road in politics. Is that we have to just be very clear about some of those things. So the question I ask when I come to a place like this, and believe me, I work with many communities that are facing development in one form or another, is this: what is your community prepared, both psychologically and legally and fiscally and emotionally, for the kinds of changes that might be coming your way? And so what tools are available to manage or help internalize some of the development costs? Who will sit at the table and negotiate these items out? And does your community, when I say community, I'm not just talking county boundaries, I'm talking about the whole community that's impacted by the kinds of changes that you're facing. Does the community have a future-oriented and I would say entrepreneurial outlook. And what I mean by entrepreneurial is the fact that you're seeking opportunities to benefit from the changes that might be taking place. I looked on the web, it's a wonderful tool, and I see there's a whole website with tremendous resources called Montana Smart Growth Coalition. I looked at some of the tools they have on there, it's all there. There's nothing magic or secretive about this, it's not a secret recipe, there's a lot of work that's already been done that's out there that you can call on. So what I can give you then is perspective. This is a picture of, that Alice saw when she fell through the rabbit hole. And all of us live in our own little world that's contained, and occasionally we have to get out of that hole and see a bigger picture. So that's what I'm going to try to give you. All I can do at this point is give you one person's experience working in resorts. And I'll use the place I live and have worked for 20 years as an example because we've gone through many of these changes. So some of the changes that you're experiencing now that you anticipate, we're going through, and are still going through, and it's not an ending process. So let me tell you a little bit about where I live. This is Park City, Utah. It's 7,000 feet in the Wasatch Mountains, which are the westernmost part of the Rockies. That's the Photoshop version that we put out on our website to make it look beautiful. And it is beautiful. It's it's a resort town. It wasn't always a resort town. It was a mining town. It was the second largest silver strike in the United States. And for 75 to 85 years, mining silver was king. Nobody, when there were 13 mills in the town, ever considered the idea of tourism, ever considered the idea of skiing. Even in Utah today, tourism is sometimes seen as an unnatural act. And we understand that and deal with it. That's the way our town was in 1885. So we have a history that, like you, it wasn't started by tourism, it had morphed into tourism. As a matter of fact, it was the mining company itself which started the ski area, because mining was so far in decline that they realized the only way they could stay alive, create an economy, was to look for something else, and they decided that mining snow might be apropos, but they were saying that it was just temporary. They were just going to do this tourism business until mining came back. Now, maybe they're right. There's an old story about Mao Zedong and Charles de Gaulle. Does everyone know who this are? I'm going to talk to some groups, but this is not the elementary school they were in, but apparently Charles de Gaulle said to Mao Zedong, Mao, what do you think of the French Revolution? And Mao said, it's too early to tell. Okay, so, you have to have maybe a longer-term perspective here. So maybe you're right, maybe mining will come back, and maybe 50 or 100 years from now, people will be looking at all the ski lifts in Park City and think, what were they thinking? But in the early days, when the ski area first started in 1962-63 season, they converted the old mine ore cars into skier trains. And they took the skiers through the tunnels about a mile and a half and then up the hoist, 1,800 feet to ski, because they thought that was what it was about. It took their insurance company 1 year to tell them that's not what it's about. So there was a pretty rapid change in just a generation or so to go from that mentality to go to high-tech industrialized tourism, which we have now. And it's a very technologically driven industry. And it's been a great industry. So these are the pictures we show now and what we do, and it's fabulous. Now, when I started in the business in 1971, and we had, at that time, what we called yuppies, the young urban professionals. These are people that look a lot like that. And for a long time, we thought everyone was a yuppie, and one day we took the time to go out and see who our customers were, and we realized they turned into furries. And that's a frozen urban refugee, a furry. They had aged, they had gotten much older. And so while the original group that came up to see us, drove in vehicles like this, in fact, the whole ski industry was founded on duct tape. And some of you might still be using that to keep your gear together. But as we turned around again, that's not the same demographic. That demographic had gotten older. The baby boomers had aged. And the baby boomers essentially fueled the tourism and ski industry. Now, let me just give you some statistics. The first baby boomer was born on January 1st, 1946, and turned 60 on January 1st, 2006. There are 78 million baby boomers. There is a baby boomer turning 60 every 8 seconds for the next 16 years. This is a generation that has experienced all the wealth that Americans can bring to the table. It's also a generation that's inheriting the greatest amount of parental wealth in human history. It's estimated that $18 trillion is being passed down from a generation of parents who saved to a generation of kids who don't know what savings are. So you have all this wealth accumulated in people who are now reaching that age where they're in their 50s and early 60s and have a lot of wealth to share and to take that and invest in places. So we started to understand that too. We were slow. We looked at the people who were ahead of us along the curve. That was during Aspen, Colorado, or Sun Valley, Idaho, places that had a history longer than Park City. When we went to Aspen, we take trips every year to different communities to see how they're doing. I would recommend that for this group as well, that you go out and actually see what other communities are doing. Don't just listen to me or look at pictures. But we went to Aspen, and we noticed that the police in Aspen were driving Saab turbos, and our police were driving Jeep Cherokees. And we said to the Aspen police chief, "Why are you driving Saab turbos?" And he said, "Because our customers don't like to get tickets from Jeeps." So we came back and we worked our public fleet. But the point being that we realized it was a lot more than just skiing that we were talking about. It was lifestyle. And you have to understand, in the context of what the changes taking place, we're not just talking about recreation. We're talking about a much larger dream and lifestyle. The person who probably understood that first was the person who started Deer Valley. And Deer Valley is part of Park City. It's in Park City. We have 3 ski resorts, 3 world-class ski resorts. Deer Valley, Park City Mountain Resort, and the Canyons, all within the Park City area. First, the man who started Deer Valley is a man named Edgar Stern, who came from the hotel business, owning luxury hotels. And 26 years ago, he said, "I see the demographics changing, and I'm going to start offering skiing at a much higher level." When I say skiing, the whole experience. I'm going to bring the upscale hotel experience to the ski industry. So rather than having duct tape or walking through your parking lot with mud and so forth, things are paved. We have shuttles to bring you there. We have valets to take your skis off the car. We give you fine food. It was a whole level up from what the ski industry had been. And whether you like it or not, that set the stage then for a lot of other people to look at this and take it the next step. What we realized too is that the nature of recreation had changed and the nature of leisure had changed. That more and more people were what we call time deprived, that they felt more stress in their life, and people then were taking more vacations but shorter vacations, and they still had lots of disposable income though. So price became less important than the experience. So I hope I'm not sort of confusing with all this, but I'm trying to tell you the evolution of the resort business from pure skiing to a different mindset. What we find today is that there are lots of people who have lots of disposable income, and what they're looking for is a much higher level of service and experience than you would normally think of when you think of just skiing. And the truth is that we compete as a ski industry. We compete with everyone. We've been in the global business for a long time. So we compete with Disney World for visitors coming to us. We compete with Las Vegas and every other form of gambling that's out there. We especially compete in the winter with cruise ship lines, which have learned how to package an experience as well. So if you want to go on a vacation with 5,000 of your best friends and eat yourself sick, you go here, but that's not what we offer. And we certainly compete with other warm weather destinations, whether it's Hawaii, Mexico. This is the U.S. Virgin Islands. We also compete traditionally amongst each other. inappropriate. So we're always looking over our shoulder at what our competitors are doing. That's why every year we take 60 to 65 of our public officials and private business people on a tour for 5 days of other resort communities around the country to see who else is doing right, so that we're not left in the dust. So we go to places like Aspen, Jackson Hole. These are places you've probably been at, and they're all beautiful. So beauty is not held in. This is where I spent most of my life in Crested Butte, Colorado. Sun Valley, I'm just going to quickly, Whistler, which is a new resort, or not new anymore, but from scratch. And in Europe as well, we compete with the European House, San Antonio, and now we're even competing with Dubai. That's an indoor ski resort in Dubai. In Dubai, it's 110 degrees in Dubai, and they have skiing here. Okay, so when I say we compete internationally, we compete internationally. And what we found also is that these aging baby boomers, they look at maps. These are very methodical kinds of people. And they look at maps, and this happens to be a map of Utah, because that's where I live, but believe me, they look at maps of the whole United States, and they're starting to say to themselves, I have all this disposable income, more money than I probably ever thought was possible, and I'm not so happy where I am now. Where else could I go? Where else could I go? And so they look at maps, and tourism has then led to other kinds of growth, where people start to figure out where to live there. So these are some of the growth generators that we see, the baby boom demographics, the fact that people can generally get to some of these places like Missoula on jet planes fairly conveniently. There's high disposable income, inheritance, technology, which through computers and the web and through all the other devices you have, cell phones and FedEx. And there's what we call the death of distance. Distance no longer matters as much. You can live in lots of places that were considered somewhat inaccessible at one time and still make a good living. And so these become lifestyle amenity refugees. People who look at the map, and guess what the fastest growing counties in the United States are? Counties that are adjacent to federal lands that have things like universities. Now, is there any place around here that's similar to that? They are escaping, some of them. So there's an escape factor of leaving what they consider to be congested cities or places that are inappropriate or that are polluted. And then there's the pull factor as well. And part of the pull factor is the fact that the western United States are the public land states, and this is an accurate representation from a book called Atlas of the New West. It was written by a friend of mine, and he shows on here the actual percentage of public land in each of these western states. So Montana here shows, I think, quite maybe 28% of public land in the state. That's a huge draw to people. People read magazines like Sunset, Outside, Western Living, and all that, and they see these stories, and they look at the Nature Channel, and they look at all the specials on television. This is a huge draw to people. So people are coming here for all the reasons that many of you might do. I mean, obviously some of you were born here, but many of you are immigrants, refugees, whatever, and you come here to see the things that you see on television. Robert Redford makes a film. A river runs through it. Everybody wants to come fish in Montana. These are all weeds in the mystique. I call it the rural mystique. And the person who saw it first, perhaps, and really capitalized on it, was Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren took the rural mystique, and he made stores all over capitalizing on that. And I like to say that you could go into a Ralph Lauren store, spend a year's salary, and come out looking like a Forest Service employee. So you take all of these factors and you look at the land use pattern maps and who owns what, and you realize, as we do, that there's a lot of private land, despite the public land, there's a lot of private land adjacent to the public lands, and that a lot of that land is for sale. I've talked to ranchers my whole life, and most of them tell me that this might be the last generation or two that's going to remain in ranching. It's just not a feasible future for most people, and their kids and grandkids just don't want to do it anymore. It's too hard. And they're also getting all the pressures of people coming in wanting to buy their places and be close to this. We made a film along with PBS that I was in called Subdivide and Conquer, a Modern Western. And we asked the question, how do cows and condos coexist? Let me give you a statistic. We have 8,000 people in Park City. We have 1,075 members of the Park City Board of Realtors. So you tell me what business we're in, and that's not unusual. That's not unusual. So I'm just trying to give you reality therapy. What business are we in? Well, we're in the business of selling dreams, of helping people relocate and taking their money. You can call it whatever you want, but those are the factors that are shaping the New West. So with all these things for sale, I can tell you in Park City in the last year, we sold $2 billion in real estate. $2 billion, that's a lot of real estate changing hands. That the average home price in the second quarter of 2006 was over $1 million. And the way it's being advertised, Park City is that is 40% lower than places like Whistler, Jackson Hole, Aspen, and Telluride. So those are the ads that go out from our realtors. Come to Park City, you get the same experience and it's 40% cheaper. Now how much cheaper is Missoula and this whole valley than Park City? So I'm just showing you kind of the truth there of how these things are being sold and what's happening. One of the greatest things you can do, and this happens to be in Aspen, as I go to all these towns to work, is you go to any of the real estate windows and stand nearby with a camera or a video camera, and you watch the tourists come and look at the prices of the land on the windows, and you hear their comments, which is just, it's funny in a way, but it's revealing in another, because all these properties are $4 million, $5 million, $8 million. And you just sit there and go, who can afford that? But there are people there that can afford it. Our assessed valuation was $1 billion essentially in 1994, and in 2006 over $4 billion in assessed valuation. That's a short period of time to get that kind of gain. We didn't ask for that kind of gain, or maybe we did, and we promoted ourselves, but that's sort of the confluence or the perfect storm of great wealth, great mobility, and beautiful places when they all come together in a single area. And a lot of that is because of what we believe. The landscapes you see are the landscapes you believe in. If you didn't believe in these things, you wouldn't have a landscape to look like that. We believe in freedom and mobility and individualism and entrepreneurialism and private property rights, and we don't trust the government. Okay? And therefore, what you get is sort of what we believe. Professor Bill Travis from the University of Colorado writes extensively about that. He just came out with a new book called The New Geography of the American West. He talks a lot about those issues all over the West. So I owe a lot to him because we worked together on some of these things. And, he's documented it. He started out with this atlas of the New West, which I showed before, and he did that like 10 or 12 years ago, where he showed how far you were each town from Starbucks, how far, how many internet connections you have. And when you start, actually, he's a geographer, you actually start mapping that out, you start to see that the West is changing very rapidly. Well, what does that mean? Okay, let's see if we get some meaning out of that. There might be some resort life cycles. First, often, and again, this is not necessarily always the case, but there's a sense of welcoming. Let's bring in, we need some economic development, we need some new blood, we need people. Things start to get developed. Often at that point, people say, there's a conflict here. It's developing too fast, or the price is going up too much. And then if you're not careful, you can get into resentment, confrontation, and the sense of community can destruct. And when I say community is a contraction of two words, and it's common unity. Together they form community. So there has to be some shared set of values for you to have a community. So I don't mean destruction in the sense like we see, unfortunately, in Iraq. I'm just talking about the sense of binding together that's so important in rural areas. That can be tenuous at that point. You start to see things like this, signs that go up. I call this a proto-geek community. Trespassers and thieves will be killed. Stay out, stay alive. And there's a certain message there, I think, it's very important. We see our realtors using ads like this, a home for generations, a lifetime of privilege. When everyone looks at those ads in Park City, we call this, sort of the Boris and Natasha ads. We don't know who these people are. They're certainly not the people we grew up with. They're certainly not the people who, that we think should be there. But that's what's being advertised too. That's the image that's being put out there. And in a democracy, visions have to compete in the marketplace of ideas. There's not one vision that says that's all. These are visions that are being put forth by people who are spending many millions of dollars to build their resorts. Another ad, White Cat Mountains, Black Tie Elegance. So I remember, and I was telling you at dinner last night, I happen to own a standard poodle. And nice big dog, lovely dog. But I remember coming to Montana probably 25 years ago and seeing a bumper sticker here that said, "Don't poodleize Montana." So I understand how this stuff kind of rubs the wrong way, but that's out there. We care about it. We say that, some people are born on third base and grow up thinking they hit a triple. So we understand that. And sometimes it really devolves into, I hate to put that out there, but that's a bumper sticker in Breckenridge, Colorado. Sometimes it devolves into that. Your own day chemist, wrote books and asked questions about when did citizens become taxpayers? When did people forget that we're all in this together and just are there to collect services? So these are some of the issues that we all face. And of course, at that point, you come in meetings like this, you hire planners and say plan. And the subtext is stop the growth. Stop all this change. Well, I'm here to tell you that I don't know how to do that. I never figured out how to stop the change unless you're inaccessible and ugly. And that's not a situation here. What's happened in most of these resorts is that the resort towns have become resort regions. And I think that's the issue that's facing here. We call it down valley, out of basin issues, where it's not just one town that's affected, but it affects the whole region. It's like a ripple effect of changes that take place. And so that's interesting. The center diffuses and spreads out to many of the more rural communities. And many things happen. Permanent population shifts. You get all these issues. Who are we? What do we really stand for? Aging populations versus the youth culture. Because the people who can afford some of these places generally are not young. They're older, as I said. These are the aging baby boomers who are fueling this. And then how do you deal with it? We deal with it partially. We have a leadership program that I help direct called Leadership Park Cities in the 13th year, where we bring people together and work, with all the communities together. I can tell you, and you probably know, it's a very delicate balancing act. And I'm not suggesting that we have any answers for you, I'm telling you how we're dealing with the problems. So let me tell you some of the ways we have dealt with the problems or are dealing with the problems. We call it sustaining Park City, and it's a changing game. It's changing all the time in a lot of ways. Each year our council comes up with a series of goals. We just went through this again. They've changed a little bit, but basically it's to keep our quality of life intact and to benefit from the growth that we're seeing. It's a tall order, but that's what we asked ourselves to do. We start out by preserving what we think is most important. It's history. We're a National Historic District, so preserving our historical roots are quite important to us. And this is a farm, if you've ever been to Park City, it's a farm at the entrance to town. We bought it as a city using public funds in 1992 for $5 million in 1992. It's less than 100 acres in the barn. And I can tell you, it was a dairy farm. There's only two things that every dairy farmer in the whole United States know. The price of milk and how much we paid for this farm. Because I've been offered farms in Wisconsin and in Michigan, and on location. So we're going to try very hard to maintain some of the historical integrity, which is a constant challenge for us, especially with the lifts going up, next to it. This is a good example. This is the old railroad depot as you come into town, and it's now a restaurant owned by Robert Redford. That's the way it looked in 1987. So we went to great lengths to not lose, and actually, by all rights, it's been ripped down, but we thought it was so important to start maintaining some of what we had left that we started building things. And that's not always what we see. A Our zoning laws and our building permits are very hard to get. So there's always this bumper sticker war that goes on when people express how they really feel to you. We think preserving open space is very important. Unlike the areas around here, we have a great amount of public land. There is no public land around Park City. And so we've been forced to buy land because ranchers always said to us, you want my land, take out your checkbook. And we said to people early on, okay, that's what we have to do. If we want to save some of the rural area that's around us, we have to buy it. Because it's not fair to people who own private property to say you're stuck with scenery. We have to find something productive. So, we identified stuff. Here's a ranch we bought on the outskirts of town. And there was the owner cutting the fence because he had a fence off so no one could go there. And we bought it from him. And I know that you just passed, is this the first open space bond? I didn't get that. Second? Okay, well, and you passed a $10 million open space bonds here. We just passed our third open space bond in the last 8 years. This is for $20 million. So 8,000 people, we spent $40 million now on buying open space. And we just passed the bond in November, and I'm in charge of the open space program. And so far, not one landowner has come to see me, and I have $20 million sitting there that I'm happy to spend. So you can get an idea of just how fast things have changed. That's our mayor, Dana Williams. So, it doesn't sound like a lot, but for us, that's huge. We've preserved over 4,000 acres of land and put conservation easements on it for our own future. Some of that is wetlands and other kinds of things. So, all I'm saying is that we've not been afraid to be entrepreneurial and put our money where our mouth is. Because we said to people early on, it's the same thing here. People said, why would you buy open space? This is the West. It's all open. So we heard that too. And I said to people, why would you buy bottled water? I still don't know why we buy bottled water. So there was the $20 million. We did a whole campaign for that and passed with 82.3% in favor. Right, what's going to be built? Well, I'm already seeing it built. We don't need any other development. I'm seeing big places built. We call them starter houses, menopause mansions, whatever you want to call them. I took this picture about 15 years ago. It's the biggest house in Park City. This doesn't even look like the gatehouse compared to some of the things that are out there now. But where does the workforce live? Where does the quote real people live that service all of that? Well, that's the more difficult part. Some things probably aren't appropriate. So, just by necessity, we've been forced into providing and participating in building affordable housing, affordable workforce housing. We have about 400 units now. Places like Aspen has 2,500 units. We have requirements on developers that for any development, a certain percentage has to be workforce housing for the workforce they anticipate would work at their development. Because it's so hard to build nowadays that it's the only way to make it work. So workforce housing is really quite important. Something that you probably haven't experienced here yet, but as you start to grow, you probably get a much larger immigrant population than you're seeing now. And that creates cultural issues, some of which are a lot of fun. I mean, the fact that suddenly you're becoming part of the world community and there's cross-cultural, it can be very entertaining and fun. So we do a lot to try to integrate that and not allow our community to dissolve again. All these things take work, but they're doable. How about our economy? Well, we try to explain to people, what our economy is made up of. 3/4 of our economy in Park City is directly related to tourism. And that would be different here. Missoula is 10 miles down the road, and Lowell is over here, Florence is there. It's a little bit different, but we just try to show people where their dollars come from to provide the services that are out there. We just finished yesterday with the Sundance Film Festival, which we've been hosting for the last 24 years in Park City. That's a huge part of our economy, so we're always looking for ways to promote what we do. I don't know if you can see this cartoon, but this is there's a man and his wife standing on the porch and watching cross-country skiers go by, and he says that it's not the damn summer people, it's the damn winter people. So I know there's that sort of feeling like, what do we need all this for? And I'm saying that's the wrong question. It's not whether you need it, it's whether it's coming and how you're going to react to it. I wanted to use the example of the Olympics because for 13 years I worked on the Olympics. in Park City. So we asked them many of the same questions that you're asking now once we started bidding on the Olympics. Salt Lake City actually hosted the Olympics for 2002, but Park City, which is only 30 miles from Salt Lake, actually hosted 40% of all the events. So we were the largest venue during the Olympics. And we had in a small town, we had the most impact. The reason that we did it is because we recognize that we're in the tourist industry, and we know where Utah is. I even know where Montana is. But we realized as we went out there into the marketplace, a lot of people didn't have a good image of Utah. As a matter of fact, for many people, Utah didn't even exist. And that we were the Rodney Dangerfield of resorts. So we're part of the problem too. We promoted ourselves. We did the Olympics so that we would get recognition to help promote our skiing and resort industry. But our goal is very simple, and this is the lesson I want to share with you. We said that we want to host the Olympics, we want to welcome the world, and we don't want to be victimized. We don't want to be victimized. In order to do that, these were our planning strategies. We said in order to be a real effective player in this, that the government, the people who represent the people, have to be a player. We have to sit at the table. We have to learn to look at the long term, not just let's put out little fires. We have to stay very focused on what our issues are and what we want to accomplish, and we have to stay flexible in that. We have to negotiate before we try to regulate, because some things should be negotiated first. And we shouldn't be dazzled by our own brochures. Right? So these are important lessons. In order to do that, and Barbara's laughing at me today, we went to 5 Olympics prior to hosting the Olympics in Park City. And we took large delegations, which was expensive. And people said, well, this is just, this is just trips, like you were saying to me. These are just, pleasure trips. And they were pleasurable, but we learned a tremendous amount from others who had already been there as to what to do and what questions to ask. Consequently, we hosted probably the most effective and profitable Olympics in modern times. We ended up with a $100 million surplus from hosting the Olympics because we sat at the table, we understood what we were doing, we were lucky, and we also benefited from it. So I just want to show you some pictures of the Olympics. If you can get a chance to see it on television, it's 5 years ago next week that they started. Here was the torch. I got to run the torch in the Park City, which was a great honor for me. And these are what the Olympics look like in terms of skiing and snowboarding, ski jumping. And so I'm a big proponent of winter sports. It's been very good to us. That's what ski jumping looks like. Aerials, we just hosted a World Cup aerial event just a few weeks ago. I never understood this sport, so I don't even talk about it. Bobsledding, cross-country skiing, and that's the way our Main Street looked. This was a great party welcoming the world. So part of recreation, and again, recreation is a contraction of 2 words, to recreate. You're asking people to come to your community to recreate. There's a dream involved in that, and there's a moral element to it. So this was our Main Street, and we would get about 25,000 people a day. These were the Budweiser horses going down. We became part of the world community. We put up signs pointing to all the previous Olympic cities, and so we felt very much part of the world. And we started to deal with the impacts, the real impacts of what that means. So we started looking and saying, okay, we have to make smart roads, not more roads. We have to take the roads we had and prepare them to be smart. Smart means, in this case, signing, and some of you see this around the country, where you give people warnings of where to park, how much delay there might be, icy conditions. They call these smart roads. We just installed, when I say we, the UDOT, the Utah Department of Transportation, just installed on our main road a fiber optic system to control all the stoplights along the main thoroughfare so that we can empty out our resorts in a more orderly fashion. Now there's always winners and losers in that. It means that the cross streets are going to have to wait a whole long time so that we can empty out 3 resorts at one time. So, but these are what I mean by smart roads. We developed parking ride lots to try to intercept cars and workers before they got into certain places because we're a small town and we're constrained by topography. We developed our mass transit system so that right now we have the 2nd largest mass transit system in the state of Utah. And for a small town, we carry 2 million passengers a year on our mass transit. This is in Salt Lake. They developed the track system, which everyone said wouldn't work. It's the most successful mass transit in the country. In the first week, they got more riders than they anticipated after 10 years. So there is a yearning for these kinds of things out there. And then suddenly, after 13 years of planning and 17 days of games, the Olympics were over. And that's how fast it went. But it left a great indelible experience for us, both in cooperating and in handling growth. And that's why I wanted to bring that up. And they were a once-in-a-lifetime incredible experience. And people always said, would you do it again? And I said, I wouldn't, but I hope somebody will, because I'm tired of it. So some of the things we're dealing with now, this is the road into Park City, so it's not vastly different from the roads here. It's a 4-lane road, and it clogs up pretty well at certain times of the day, and more so. So we're looking at what we can do constantly to upgrade those. People always talk about parking issues. I don't know any clever parking solution. There's only so many Hummers you can fit into a given area. We just built a new parking garage. We have one parking garage. Now we just built a new one. But at the same time, we're saying to people from a sustainability standpoint, parking might not be the best way to go, and private cars might not be the best way. These are a series of 4 slides that were given to me from a European planner. And what it shows here is here's everyone in the private car driving down the street. Here's what they look like. Stripped away of all the 3,000 pounds of metal. Here's what they look like as they took the bus. And here's what it would look like if they used multimodal transportation, including walking and bicycle riding and strolling and things of that nature. So we're starting to talk about how can we be sustainable. So we're doing a lot of work now on this whole issue of sustainability and mass transit. There is part of our bus system, and that's goes to mention, but we have 36 of these coaches that we ride. We converted them all to biodiesel last year, so we're using a more friendly fuel. This is when we pulled this poor lady off the bus, and she thought we were going to arrest her or something, but we were just giving her a gift certificate for a free trip to Park City, because she was the millionth passenger that year on the bus, and it actually passed 2 million. So that's how many people are actually using this system. And we won an award for National Award for Sustainable Development because we developed this wonderful transit center in town. So we're heavily geared now to saying we can't fit more cars in the town. We can't do more to make that easier. We have to start transitioning to mass transit and walkability. And we're doing a big walkability, bikeability study now and trying to get the community behind us by connecting trails, making sure it's easy to get around, and signing the trails. We have other things, water issues, I'll just go quickly. We're looking heavily, we buy about 40% of all the city's energy needs. Now when I said the city government, by wind power. Blue Sky Initiative, it's called. So we're trying to look at the long-term future here. We started a green building initiative, and when we started it, we got the building community behind us. In this first seminar that we held, we thought we'd have 30 or 40 people, we had 200. People show up. People are yearning then to see how they can be more sustainable. So the time is right to talk about these issues and bring them forward. Even hazardous waste removal, and we're looking seriously at that. So let me talk a little bit here about modern resort development and where it's going. This happens to be up at Whistler. And a lot of resort development started in the sort of late 19th century, this kind of big, signature hotels in Europe and places like that. Many of them built by the railroads to get tourists out there. Sun Valley, built by the railroad to get tourists. National parks, it's called like architecture, to get tourists out there. This is Preston Butte. So a lot of our towns, again, went from natural resource towns and morphed into ski resort towns. Aspen did the same thing. That's Aspen Mountain. Telluride, that's Telluride right there. And then they have a lift that goes all the way up to the Mountain Village, it's called, which is a new development up on the mountain. And then some of the older areas like Jackson Hole, they're ripping this out this year. We ripped it out already and replacing it with a new one. This is the president there, Jerry Bland, talking about how resorts, and we're all seeing it, have to constantly redevelop. And that's sort of what I showed you before, the picture of the cop car in Aspen. You can't stand still in this business. The industry keeps moving, and we have to keep moving with it. Here's the father of modern resort development, a man named Eldon Beck. It's a man I've had the pleasure of working with. He's a man that really sort of sparked the whole idea of building mountain villages in this country. And the first one he built was in Vail. Vail, Colorado was the first experiment, and very successful. And he always said to me that there's only two things that he said that Americans don't like. They don't like density, and they don't like sprawl. And so his idea was to come up with something on the European model of how can we then build what we would call now the new urbanism, although it wasn't called that when he started doing it. But how do we get the best of sort of density, nature, livability in the mountains without sprawling and without creating huge amounts of density? And so he really worked on the whole Vail experience, and Vail has been very successful in that. This is the Whistler resort that he designed. And so he designed Whistler in Blackpool, which again, based on the principles of walkability, of stores on the first floor, building, living units above it, of excitement, of creating view corridors and things of that nature. He also designed Mount Tremblant in Canada. So again, using sort of the indigenous feeling here of the French Huguenot architecture, but trying to find models that would work and not be sprawl and not be too dense. And it's been interesting to see now that even Vail, which is only 40 years old, is now going through what they call the New Dawn. They're going through a $1 billion redevelopment because they realize that a lot of their product is old. That's what we're showing there. And so as you go around the country and you look at what's being designed and what's being built, you can see that there are lots of examples now, but they generally are following the same pattern of how many units will work, what kinds of densities you need, what kinds of retail spaces you'll need, and it's being sold. And this happens to be by where I live in the canyons. And they're building a village as well, and they put these signs in. I don't know if you can see them, but these are the real estate signs. It says, imagine owning an Aspen in 1972. And the next one says, imagine getting in at Beaver Creek in 1992. And it says, imagine living in the canyons in 2002. So they were just basically showing that there's great value in good planning and being in these places. And these are what some of them look like. This happens to be the canyons near Park City. This is Harry Frampton, who owns a company called East West Partners. It's been largely responsible for building some of these places. And so he's very adamant about these are what people are looking for with money. They're not looking for, some of them are looking for the ranch experience, the mountain village experience. And this is Beaver Creek, called Bachelor Gulch. You might like this or not. It's got a ersatz mountain in it, but this is in Lake Tahoe's Heavenly Valley, where they've gone through a large redevelopment of the mountain village. This is in North Star, also in the Tahoe Basin, where they're building a huge mountain village of about 2,500 units, and golf courses and clubs. And here's what it looks like where they're actually working, we're still there, putting the finishing touches on the first part of the village. And you might say, well, what's the cost of that? Because I was asking today about what's the cost per square foot and downtown, what's the cost here, what's the cost there? The cost here, well, I can tell you, the cost in Deer Valley, they're building some new product up there at $1,600 a square foot. Are people paying it? Yes, as fast as they build it. Okay. I think this is about $1,000 a square foot here. But that's the kind of finishes that we're seeing in some of these places. This is in Squaw Valley in California, where they built a mountain village. Interwest, another big company that builds mountain villages, owns Whistler Blackcomb, built a mountain village there. And then just in Park City, they just finished this called the Talisker Club. It's about 2,000 square feet, and it cost them $10 million to build this club, a private club for the members who live in that area. So I know Barbara's like sweating already here, but I just wanted to show you what it is. This is a gilded society. Gilded society. So, okay, so let me see if I can bring this together. So all this is all happening, we're all kind of seeking what I call the golden grail of sustainability. The ability to sustain. Many people say, well, is this just a real estate bubble? Is this like the roaring 20s, that's going to end in the Great Depression? I can't answer that question. I don't know. I can tell you that the idea is that while some areas are going down in price around the country, Phoenix, Denver, places like that, New York, the resorts have not seen any decline in real estate values. They see declines this past year in the amount of sales, but not in the cost of the sales. So I know that some of you might be here representing environmental groups, and so I'll put that in there because the idea of how we sustain this future is pretty important. And this might all sound very hypocritical. How could you do this on the one hand and really sustain it on the other? This might be the same here. Some people have told me this, that's why I put it in. That our generation might best be remembered by what we choose not to do. Do we have the power to do it? Yes, but we choose not to do it because it's too destructive. I can't answer those questions. That's the context you bring to the discussion. I'm just saying I recognize that that's a legitimate concern out there. So what we've tried to do in Park City is to pay homage to that concern and see if there is some way to create a sustainable resort. Now again, that might be an oxymoron. People have told me that it's an oxymoron. But when we say sustainable resort, we're looking at the community, the environment, and the economy working together. We're not just saving the environment, we're not just saving the community or the economy. Together is the balance of those three. We have to work at. So we look at this, the elements of sustainability, ecological, economic, community, and also what's our social responsibilities? Wealthy people move in. What responsibility do they have to the rest of the community to make sure that they don't push everyone else out? There was the old saying in Aspen for years that the billionaires are pushing out the millionaires. And there's some truth to that. So there are a lot of sustainability issues, and we've been talking about it tonight. Growth, development, transportation, open space, amenity. These are the things that you'll be talking about in the next couple of years. Who's going to sit at the table? Who's going to negotiate these? And what tools do you have? And in light of all that, this whole idea of global warming, which keeps coming up, and I think Al Gore's movie, did a lot to kind of bring this to the forefront. But here's a study that was just recently done in Aspen where they showed over from 1955 all the way to 2005, a variety of trend lines that show that there are fewer days below zero, there are less snow, less frost-free days, and that spring has come earlier and earlier. So we're taking that seriously here. You haven't seen much snow here. It's been a pretty dry year in Park City. There's been no snow in Europe until the last 2 weeks. We've looked at all the data too. Now it's hard, the weatherman said yesterday that it's going to be clear and sunny today. So how can they predict 30 years from now, 50 years from now, in the 21st century? It's an issue. But we do know from all the evidence that their glaciers are melting. Here's two guys walking down the street and I'm starting to get concerned about global warming. We just hosted a meeting like this in Park City where the ski area itself commissioned a study by global scientists in Boulder, Colorado, at the university, and the National Atmospheric Research Area, a study of what global warming would do to Park City. They basically told us that if things go along the same trend line, that we'd have 2 or 3 weeks shorter season by 2030, that we'd have no snow below about 85 to 9,000 feet by 2075, and by the 21st century there wouldn't be any snow at all. That's what they told us. We had this meeting, this is one of the scientists, we have a big auditorium, we had 1,200 people show up to that meeting. So we're taking it seriously. Here's positive proof of global warming. So you can use whatever indicators you want. Somebody sent me that, thought I'd share with you. So what does it mean? I don't know. These are questions, again, these are context questions. Does it mean stepping off the growth continuum? And that we say finally is enough? But then what do the laws say? I'm not sure how you get there. We know that community sentiment is this, that we'd like to have a sustainable environment, but we know that people are building these mega homes and that they're driving SUVs, and so we have a conflict here. And each community has to sort of work that out for themselves. Some communities have definitely taken the lead on how to develop and be sustainable. Aspen has a great program. You can go on their websites, see all the work that they've done to be sustainable. Whistler has adopted what they call the Natural Step Program, which comes out of Denmark. So I won't go through this. I'm just showing you that communities are faced with this kind of exponential growth and the kind of wealth are taking these issues seriously. Tahoe, just in Tahoe speaking, they've adopted what they call the triple bottom line, social, environmental, economic, and have done their plans accordingly, trying to balance it out. In Park City, we have a whole series of initiatives here that we consider adding to sustainability over the long term. So we are taking it seriously. I'm going to try to end here. I know I'm speaking a long time, but a lot of people look to Europe and say, why can't we be like that? So luckily I've had a chance to work in Europe. These are the Dolomites. In a lot of these resorts, Kitzbühel, people say, isn't that fabulous? A lot of these towns like Cortina or Kitzbühel, that they really de-emphasize the cars. Some places, you don't even have cars like Graz and you just drive in and park in a parking lot, and then you take a train into town, and they make it work. Some of it, though, depends on a set of circumstances that's vastly different than ours. About a year and a half ago, I was invited to work with a place called Aviemore in Scotland. This is right here, this is Aviemore Castle. And Aviemore in Scotland is the largest resort in the British Isles, ski resort. And they used to have a ski season of about 140 days a year. And for the last 5 to 8 years, they had less than 50 days of snow a year to deal with. So that's why they invited me, because they said, we're dying. Here's a ski resort. What else can we do for a season? And I stayed with this man here. And his name is Johnny Bowler. And I realized just how different we were. I mean, sometimes we don't realize that, but I said to him, he had this what's called Murchis. They don't have national parks the way we have here. They have large estates, and he owned this estate, and they treat it like a national park. He's the visitor center, you pay money to go in, and he runs it. It's a private estate that his family owns. So I said, are you native here, Johnny? He said, no. I said, have you always lived here? He said, no. Well, I said, where did you used to live? He said, our family lived 10 miles down the road. So I said, when did you move up here? He said, 1066. I said, and he was serious, this wasn't a joke. I said, 1066, yeah, with the Norman Conquest. He said, we got pushed out, and we moved up here. So the whole idea of land tenure is just so different. And I've gotten a chance to teach a couple times at a place called the Salzburg Seminar in Salzburg, Austria. This is the picture of Salzburg. And we've come up with some of these seminars, the fundamentals of European resort sustainability. People here are so interested in how the Europeans do it. And this is sort of I'm going to say this is definitive, but these are the ideas we came up with. That there's an idea in Europe of limits, which is very un-American. We don't really think that there's limits, we think it's unlimited. That there's a strong craftsmanship tradition, that something that's built in 1066 will still be up now, which it is. That there's a strong cultural traditions, that you don't have mobility the way we have here, not either social nor economic, that you're pretty much stuck in a place, and you know your place in the social geography. That there's resources are scarce and you have to use them efficiently. Many places you don't throw away things the way we do here. And again, this lack of economic and social mobility. So I always tell people the problem with European solutions is that they're un-American. Unless we start adopting some of those mindsets, we're not going to get to how they do it in Europe. And even Europe is getting away from it, is adopting more of the American mindset. So as you look at the European resort, there are great models there, but you have to understand again the culture that led to those models, and that's the important part. So as we look at those models, you have to realize you can't just parachute their solutions into what we're doing. So I looked at what we're doing here. I looked at the market analysis done by RRC, which I thought was a very honest appraisal of the situation here. So I won't go through that, but the question is always asked, well, skiing growing. Well, this shows in 19 I think 2004, it's growing at 9.2%. It shows 56 million skiers. There's about over 60 million skiers last year. It'll be less this year because of weather. But it continues to grow, but grows slowly. So are there skiers out there? Yes. Is the industry dying? No. Has the number of skiers in the country shrunk? Yes. But most of the areas that shrunk are mom and pop areas that couldn't afford to stay in business. So what's sparking your growth here? We talked about it. Aging and wealthy baby boomers, a lot of money sloshing around, and the natural draws of Missoula County and the county here, airport, the city, abundant lands, the university, relative affordability, and you can name others. And then the publicity you're going to start getting if you haven't already in local magazines and so forth. How are you going to deal with all this? Well, that's where the community has to come together here. It means exercising foresight. And you have to think about the future but act in the present. And that's scary. I understand it's scary. Most of us would rather hide and deny that these things are happening to us. And yet as this change happens, I think there's always two cycles that you can look at. There's the sort of the innovation cycle where you can take advantage of the changes, or the resistance cycle where you say, I don't want it to change, I'm not going to change, and leave me alone. Kenneth Bolton, a great professor, once said it's a great mistake to be clear in our minds about vague realities. I don't know what the future will bring. I have no silver bullets for you. But I do know this, that to me a community is based more on relationships than on issues. And so the fact that you came out tonight and are willing to talk together, and reason together, and think together, and be honest about what's happening in the world, I think is important. And it does take courage. This is an old Hopi saying I had hanging above my desk for years. The moon would never rise if it paid attention to all the dogs barking at it. So I think there's a spiritual element to this, and you have to keep whatever it is that you want, and you have to protect that and fight for it, and at the same time you have to recognize that change is coming. Saying all that, I thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to, I know you've been saying for a long time, try to answer your questions without getting stuck in it.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation and for the county commissioners for arranging you to come here. I have a question about the tax structure and the tax implications of something like the Bitterroot Resort, and I'll phrase it in the form of a statement. You tell me where I'm wrong. What we have in Montana is income tax and property tax. We have no sales tax. The people that come to buy these houses at the proposed Bitterroot Resort will mostly be out-of-state people who will not pay the income tax, or they will pay the property tax. The people who come to live in the service community will pay income tax, but they'll be mostly low-income service jobs. And it seems to me very likelihood that Montanans are anxious to support schools and police and things like that, and open space, as you mentioned. But we're concerned about, subsidizing things that will actually result in deterioration of our lifestyle. And it seems to me that ultimately, through our property taxes, that's what's going to happen to this Bitterroot Resort put into place.
I take it, I was honest, but I can see that there's a political statement there as well. Is that true? Yes. I think it's important that any group facing potential for growth, and I painted a picture which in my estimation you're facing that potential. I don't want to say it's a gun in your head or anything of that nature, but I'm saying that all the signs point to this place being the next great place, whatever you would say. So that does mean that you have to look at the tools you have and then either lobby for other tools or figure out that there are places where we have developers in our community that freely give exactions, freely give, it sounds like an oxymoron there. It helps support some of the things that we don't have legislation for, because they realize too that in order to have a successful resort or experience or development, that they have to have certain facilities in place, and impoverishing the local community is not a good way to gain acceptance. So these are the kinds of things you have to negotiate. I can tell you that no place has a perfect situation, but we have instituted in the state of Utah, and some of that has been through lobbying at the legislature. We have resort city sales tax, we have an arts tax, we have a lodging tax, We have a 45% homestead exemption, which means that second homeowners essentially pay 100%, but permanent residents pay only 55% of the tax bill. Those things make development a lot more palatable to us because we don't feel that it's impoverishing us. Is that possible to happen here? I don't know your local politics well enough to tell you that it is. I'm just telling you that you can point to your legislators and say, these are what other places experiencing rapid growth are doing to make sure that the local people don't feel put out by this whole thing. So I think you're absolutely right to have that concern. I can't tell you how to solve it in your local context, other than that you should be bringing that up as you just did.
I'm confused because in the paper it said we were going to come and talk about the pros and cons of this resort and so far the cons. So, I mean, the last hour has been basically exactly where most of us don't want to see the community end up, particularly with the, it may be incentive to you and people who have millions to see the value of those properties going at $1 million and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't strike well in the hearts of most Montans to look at that and be in awe. It's not.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
And the second thing, the second comment, which kind of baffles me, you look at what you're spending, you talk about the money you're raising to buy open space and how important it is and so forth. And yet, I look at where we're at today and I'm thinking, right now today, we don't have to spend $10 or $20 million to protect our open space. We just have to speak out and make sure that we protect it today rather than try and buy that back down the road.
Well, if it's that easy, I would suggest you keep speaking out. I haven't found that to be effective, quite frankly. And so, given the fact that we live in an economy that, as I said, has mobility, and you can't tell rich people that they can't move to certain places, that we believe in property rights, you're going to be faced at some point where speaking out probably is not enough. That's when we found ourselves. So it's not that I was advocating, I was showing you the realistic projection of where we've been. And the examples I was showing are not just Park City. These are based on 50 resorts that I've worked with. So, do I like living in a resort? I love it. I love it. And I'm not saying that's for everyone. I'm just saying, did I choose to live there? I guess I did in that sense, but it was, when I grew up in Crested Butte, we had 300 people there. So it wasn't exactly a resort town in those days, in the 50s. So it wasn't a choice necessarily, but that's the reality. Our people were kind of starving. We're not starving here at this point, so you feel like, hey, we're doing fine. But you tell me then how you're going to stop some of this from happening. I'm not speaking up, it's certainly important, and I'm not suggesting we don't do that. I'm just saying at some point, just like the rancher said to us, you want my land, buy it. And we got to sort of bite the bullet and say, yeah, okay, we're going to buy it, we're going to plan, we're going to do what we can to benefit from the growth that's coming because we can't control all those other factors. We have not suspended the law of economics in Park City, and you haven't suspended them in Montana. So that was just my approach. I'm not saying you can't change things here, but...
How similar is Park City to Lowell, Montana?
At this point, not at all, but a lot of our outlying communities are very similar to Lowell. And I haven't seen
I want
anything.
to talk about how you call Park City, your experience in Park City, or the dealing called the dams. Seems to me like elevation wise, snow levels, all that is so very different. I'd like to hear you compare and contrast a little between what we have here and what we have in Park City.
Well, the base area here is what, is it 6? What's the base area?
35,
35, okay. And you're about 500 miles further north, so that's like 1,000 feet there. If you believe that there's no snow at all, I look at the hills now, I see some snow there. So there's some snow you have there. I can't really speak, nor do I intend to speak to the specifics of this particular proposal. All ski resort developments, golf course developments, all of these are real estate developments. The skiing, the golf, is always an amenity that's added on to that. Nobody that I know of nowadays is just building a ski area trying to make money off the lift terrace and strong. So it's a very competitive business. It's just the fact that you have a mountain, you have beauty, doesn't mean you'll be successful. The outline should be...
How much snow does Park City get in winter time? Accumulated on, maybe on the average?
Yeah, well, and you know, it can be 300 inches. 300 inches. But given the snowmaking now, you know, that's another factor that's involved in it too. Right now we're making snow. It's the first year I've ever seen us make snow in January, you know, almost February. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, these are issues that you have to overcome. But can they be overcome? I've seen them overcome. We're making snow. If we didn't have snowmaking now, we'd still have skiing, but it wouldn't be, quote, world-class skiing. So
As a follow-up to that, what you see out there now has been pretty typical in recent winters without much snow, if any, at the base level. And it stays on the runs that have been cut some. But it's clear that this resort would be highly dependent on snowmaking. In a part of the country when people really pride themselves in skiing on powder. So one of the things that's puzzled me a little, maybe some of the resorts you work with are really dependent on snowmaking. It seems to me the quality of the snow is quite different, and I'm just wondering if you've had that experience.
every modern resort is dependent on snowmaking. Not so much to extend the season. The season, in order to make money, has to be fairly long. It can't just be a month, you know, when the snow falls. So we're snow farmers, just like those of you who raise cattle or something, you know, you irrigate the fields, and that's exactly what snowmaking is. You're irrigating the snow. You're making snow. It's a technological situation. Nobody probably in the farming industry anymore, or ranching industry, is just totally dependent on what the weather's doing. You try to augment that. That's certainly true in all the resorts. Do we get more snow than here? Probably. Does that create something that we can boast about? Yes. We in our license plates, in our advertisement, we say the greatest snow on earth. That's probably still true this year. You know, we've had a lot less of it than normal, but you have less of it than we've had. So, you know, we probably do have the greatest snow still. But yeah, I mean, having great snow is a wonderful asset. I'm just saying that's what I'm trying to show you, the whole transition of the ski resort into a four-season second home. The nature of the business has changed, where skiing is not nearly as central to most people's buying decisions as it was 20 years ago. And I don't know if I got that point across. That's what I was trying to get across. But these have become multifaceted recreational experiences. And people would move here because you have a good school system, or because the university is nearby, or because you have access as much as for the snow quality. Excuse me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Both your presentation, I think, can point to like a certain inevitability of development based upon economic forces. Which I see largely true in Park City, mainly because all the land is just so privately owned. We're talking about a ski resort here where the bulk of it is going to be developed on public land. That public land happens to be managed by the Forest Service, which employs a multiple use mandate. And those uses, the driving force behind them might not be economic growth. There's other reasoning behind them as well. How do you explain the inevitability of development in Lolo as opposed to Park City, where the land is privately owned?
Yeah. I think, you know, again, nothing is inevitable. I mean, trend is not tested. There could be a depression tomorrow, and all these people with money decide they're not going to spend it. What I was just trying to show you was the forces that have built up in our country. And if you look at, it's not only resorts, but if you look at all the private equity now that's buying out private companies and taking them, public companies, and taking them private, all I'm just showing you is where things are headed, where things have been.
But you can't buy public land like you can buy a public company, though.
No, that's quite true. But as you said, the mandate is for multiple uses.
Correct.
So one use, I know at one time that was proposed there that the Forest Service seemed to agree with was some sort of recreational use. Seemingly they turned around on that. I'm not suggesting that it's inevitable. I'm just saying, here's what's happening elsewhere. I can tell you that many ski resorts, existing ski resorts, have been able to expand in major ways over the last 5 years on public land. All right? That doesn't make it inevitable here. I'm not here arguing for or against, I'm here to tell you what's happening elsewhere. I told you, I wanted to give you this perspective. And there have been major expansion permissions granted in Colorado, in Utah, and in California over the last 5 years.
I used to drive from Park City about 25 years ago, and I kind of watched the transition to what you're living out. And I was wondering if there were any studies to track the lifestyles and the disposition of the people who lived there in the beginning and their families, and to find out how they, if at all, benefited economically, because a lot of the studies I've seen showing developments like that does not benefit the people who live there. They end up either moving away because they can't afford to live there, or they end up working for these multi-million-dollar people from wherever. This is currently about 10% of our population. So 90% of the people really aren't benefiting from this. So why in the world would we ever want to propose to promote this sort of thing if we're not only giving up our Crescent Valley, but we're also not benefiting economically?
Obviously, I was too strong on what seems to be the benefits. What I'm suggesting to you, I wasn't saying you should promote it or anything else. I was just telling you what forces are at play here. That's what I was trying to show.
Studies done in Park City about what happened to those people?
Yeah, a lot of those people, as you say, I mean, people who want a rural lifestyle. Park City is what I would call now medium rural. And that means you can see the cows, but you don't smell the cows. So it's medium rural. The cows are back cut. So the people living there now have made either that compromise or they've moved to Montana. Okay? They've moved more rural. And there are lots of, people who move into our community who then say to us, well, we don't want to see Sundance there. That's why I showed that slide about the damn summer people down there. So we don't want that. I said, well, there's probably 95% of Utah you could have moved to. Why'd you choose Park City to move to? You're saying the people who are already there. The people who own property or own businesses and watch those businesses prosper and watch more jobs for their kids, a lot of them have said this is great. I mean, I deal with a lot of people who are in the mining industry who watch the Depression when all their kids had to leave. Now they say, hey, at least my family can live here now and work. So there are winners and losers. There's no doubt about that. And I didn't try, I hope I didn't try to gloss that over. People, I mean, I would just, maybe I shouldn't say this here, but if you don't own land here now, I'd buy it. I'd buy it. Because you'll think it's expensive now, you'll go around 2 years, I should have bought it. I hear that all the time. All the time. I could have bought it when it was, 5 years ago. Why didn't you? Well, I don't know, I didn't get around to it. Well, I'm just saying that there are people out there who covet what you have here, and they have money, and unless you can figure out some way to get around the Constitution of the United States, I don't know how to kick them out of here. That's what I was saying. I haven't figured it out. And it's not that I advocate it, I've been there to do it, I protect the community's interest. I wasn't there to work with the rich people, I work with the town. And all we've said is, how do we benefit from what we can't stop? Not that we haven't fought things, we fought them, but...
Based on your market analysis and research that you did, that you pointed out on your slide here, can you help share with us a little more information about the results of that analysis based on these demographics, if in fact the Forest Service would not allow you a permit to build on our land?
Yeah, and this is all speculative, I mean, you're asking me that.
But what did your analysis say?
Well, I thought the analysis of that report that was fairly, I thought it was pretty straightforward. I didn't think they pulled a lot of punches.
It didn't work?
No, they said it could work as a regional ski resort. They suppose that the Forest Service would approve addition to the land there. But can it work on the land that's just there without the Forest Service? I think at some level, sure it could work. It might not be, I keep hearing this word world class. It's sort of like you're an overnight success after 40 years. We were working at making our resorts world class because that's what we chose to do. But it's taken us 40 years of money, sweat, labor, everything to keep that going. So I don't think you open tomorrow and you're world class. I think the report clearly said that it could be a regional resort, it could work at some level. And I think it listed some pricing, some price range, and how to engage the local population and so forth. I can't really say, what it would be. It might be different than as a full-blown resort with runs everywhere. But I think it could work. I think there are people out there, as I said, I don't know if I'm being clear about that. I think there are people out there who have no ski area whatsoever. And if you build a second home community there, would definitely buy into your lifestyle here, especially if it's well planned. You put just jogging trails, so there are people who will buy it. Yes.
I would very much hope that people in this room would not shoot the messenger.
I do feel a little vulnerable here.
I believe in some of the situations that you talked about, and I think you would accurately portray what is happening. We face more than the issue of a ski area, right? We face an issue of rapid growth. People who have the money to come here to buy whatever they want and build bigger and bigger. And so we need to take from what you have told us to understand how we can deal with that rapid growth that's occurring. Because we do have the amenities here, and we're growing rapidly over the last 10 years, and it's going to continue. So let's take away the message that we need to get together and talk about how we can structure dealing and accommodating that rapid growth which is going to occur on private land all up and down this two path.
Maybe you partner. I think you said it more clearly than I did. Because that's basically what I'm trying to say. I think the proposal that's before you is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, as I said, I looked at the land pattern map. Is it Plum Creek that owns half the private lands here? What do you think, what business do you think they're in? Yeah, I mean, so I'm just trying to give you, I'm just saying, look at what's there, folks. I mean, sometimes when you see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's the train coming at you. Yes.
In your experience, what have you found developers willing to do to help mitigate some of their impact on these communities?
I don't want to give you a flip answer to this because I tend to get flip occasionally. Certainly it helps when you can sit at the table and ask them to give you things. And that's why I'm trying to use the example with the Olympics. The more you know, the more places that you send your public officials to learn what other communities similarly situated have done, the more expertise they bring to the table to negotiate, the better off you are. The more tools you have in your toolbox, the better off you are. It's in everyone's private interest, generally, unless they have a really strong eleemosynary or charitable streak, to externalize as many issues as they can to better their bottom line. That's not evil, that's our system. That's the way the game is played in America. Saying that, though, I think it's in the public's interest, and that's what I've spent my whole career doing, to learn the game, to be entrepreneurial, so that I consider myself and our department entrepreneurs for the public service. We have to be as entrepreneurial as many of the developers and financial people coming in, and that's what we did with the Olympics. People booth smoke at us all over the place. I'm not talking about the local. I mean, you bring all kinds of people in here with bankrolls that you can't even afford. And they'll tell you all kinds of things. It's important that you know what you want and you set that up on the wall. When we did the Olympics, we set up 5 things that we absolutely wanted. One, we didn't want, and I don't want to list them all, we didn't want to be stuck with a big public debt. Because most places were stuck with a huge public debt because they didn't ask for enough. I told you, the state of Utah came out with $100 million surplus. We fulfilled that. We wanted to involve our kids. That was very important to us. We made sure we did that. We wanted to make sure that we had great physical legacies after the games. Our bus system, our transit system, our transit barn some of the things that we built were all legacies to us. So we were very clear, we were explicit. That's what I mean by communities getting together and working together to say, this is what we expect for the community. I'm not saying you'll get it all. It's not like a Santa Claus wish list. You're going to stick developers with everything because they have lawyers too, but I just mean that the level of sophistication and energy that you bring to the negotiations, you never get it unless you ask. There'll be some developer, a developer who's doing a high-end development, and not all the developments are high-end, but I much rather deal with knowledgeable developers who know what they're doing, who understand who their market is, than being nibbled to death by ducks. Because you can get a whole lot of suburban sprawl, which is the worst form of development. You not only don't get the benefits of urban development and trails and open space and facilities, but you get all the cost of providing services spread out all over the place. So you get the worst of both worlds, not the best. I don't think that answers your question. I can't give you a list, but I would say I'd ask for a lot. Yes, sir.
Did you all have a process in place prior to the onslaught of development where you had a visioning?
Yes.
With Park City? Can you talk a little bit about what's required to help the community come together?
Well, it's things like this, but I think having a formal visioning process that really involves as many elements of the community, getting the community talking together. At this point, you're talking to me or attacking me or competing with me, but I won't forget this soon, I won't be back in Montana for a while. But the visioning process is very important. Many of you disagree with things I said. That's fine. I'm not saying, I tried to say it was one man's view from Park City. I tried to say I'm going to give you a perspective, which is my perspective of having dealt with the industry. But I was also giving you a perspective, I don't work for the developers. I work for cities and counties. So I'm just trying to give you that perspective. But having people talk to each other and coming up with sort of your non-negotiable list of what we want to do. I just don't find it fruitful, and that's why I kind of jumped back at you when you jumped at me. I've opposed many things in my career. Some of them have worked, but I realized at some point that it's sort of like, what we say, pissing into the hurricane. When the forces are so big coming your way, sometimes it's better to figure out how to work with it and mold it somehow or shape it somehow than to think you can stop it. If you think you can stop it, I'm not suggesting you don't try. I'm just saying it hasn't been successful in my career. I stopped the mining operation in Colorado.
I think two really important things we have to consider if this becomes something that we decide to be good for us is that people who move in, although it might bring us an economic improvement, we need to also realize that they bring with them the destruction of the rural lifestyle that they find attractive here. I moved here more than 30 years ago. I lived, at the time, I lived in Northern Virginia in Fairfax County. Beautiful rolling green hills. The Fairfax County Fox Hunting Club was there. It was gorgeous. If you want to see beautiful property like that, you have to watch a movie now. I was about a half an hour horseback ride from this beautiful 7,000-acre estate. We had free rein to ride on. It was gorgeous. Fox, deer, beautiful, beautiful. And people from all over drove through it, fell in love with it. And what we have instead now is Reston and Dulles. People had to leave. It became so expensive, so crowded, so hostile, because the people who moved chose not to assimilate in the community. When we keep stressing community, they rejected the community culture and brought their own and refused to adapt. And when I moved here, I never heard anybody comment on how hostile and rude the Zuluians were. And suddenly in the last 5 or 10 years, I don't know more than 30, but the last several years when we've had so much growth, all of a sudden we're saying the drivers are rude. It's not long-time residents, it's the people who moved here for the lifestyle but reject people who make the lifestyle what it is. So we need to consider that very carefully.
I think you make a good point. It's one of the reasons we've tried. I'm not saying we've been successful, but we've tried to not only provide the recreational experience for people who move in, but try to embrace them as people and not look at them as just some sort of virus coming in. I said, okay, you're here now. We've tried to engage our second homeowners. We've tried to engage people who recently moved there. As part of this leadership program we do a lot of other programs where we ask them, why did you move here? And what are you personally going to do? We don't just want your money here. We want you here then. If you're here, then be here.
But it seems to me that just by their own definition of this being my second home, this is not what I call home. This is my alternative residence or when I'm not home.
Right, and some people, I mean, a lot of people, that's all they want is a refuge. I don't know, to me it's sort of a code of conduct. You try to, if you don't impart your culture or what your culture means, you can't expect them to just sort of pick it up by osmosis in a short period of time. So you're here long enough time, like you are, 30 years, you pick it up. But someone's moving here, I think you have to figure out methodology thing to impart. What does it mean to live in Missoula? What is important about rural lifestyle? Now you're right, just the fact that you have more people, that's not rural. So that part of it is kind of gone, as you said. But I found that those communities that have pushed that away and tried to segregate, the people who move in, that's where I call self-destruct. They're not a community anymore. I think we've tried. I'd say a lot of people think we're successful at it. A lot of new people who moved into our community really have done tremendous good for our community. Have really contributed themselves, their energy, to nonprofits, to cultural events, to the schools. Have really brought a lot with them, as well as their money.
Are you talking about residents or are you talking about?
Even people that are not, people that are a week or 2 weeks, that's all they're there for. Well, we're finding many people who, come to vacation there and suddenly they're there 3 months, 4 months. They're trying to make it part of their life. And I'm just saying I would embrace those people rather than, but that's what we try. Please.
I get the sense that one of the things that's confusing here is the sense that I don't think anyone can deny that growth is occurring and is going to occur, but we have a very specific type of growth, which raises a whole host of its own issues, and I think, too bad. That's totally derailed. But we're talking about a 4-season resort, and we're talking about whether that is something that we want to consider, not whether growth is going to happen, that's inevitable. But it doesn't, I don't want to split things into this thing you talked about, innovation versus resistance. There's innovation with larger growth, with how you want to plan that, but just if you oppose a resort, it shouldn't put you in this resistance category that's resistant to this whole larger trend. And I think that's where you're running into passions here, is that, everyone knows we're going in one direction, but this is a very specific element of that direction, whether that is really tenable or desirable.
That's the local context. I try to say my whole career has been in resort areas. I find good resort planning certainly beats a bunch of sprawl, personally.
But wouldn't have to be sprawl. I mean, if you go into it with these ideas and these planning and these smart growth tactics, you can contain sprawl, you can have a whole different vision for your city, but, whether you need to have a 4-season resort in a warming climate with a number of other issues is really what's at issue.
Okay. Well, thank you. I can't answer that. But I think your point is, you don't need a resort to understand that growth is going to occur, and you're saying that you don't care for the resort aspect very much.
Well, it's just involving different types of growth and different types of smart growth, and also, there's not even a proposal yet for anything. I mean, that's the whole other thing we're dealing with, is that, we're talking about meetings.
And I think your point then, whatever growth takes place here should be planned and smart is the key. I agree with it.
But yeah, all I'm saying is, I did get that sense of inevitability from the top, that it's going towards, resort is coming, we only had these aspects. I don't see it that way at all. I think we could be, this specific one is at all desirable.
So a general question. I don't know the answer. I mean, that's a lot.
A month ago, I received a triple A Bible magazine in the mail, and on the front cover, it showed the Bitterroot Valley as a destination ski area above Ashland, Wyoming, and above Denver, Oregon. And that was really news to me, and it became clear that the Bitterroot Resort is marketing their project well in advance of being approved, and that's kind of what's happening. You know, a lot of our figures in the Bitterroot are showing actual decline in demand for housing because of active marketing and aggressive marketing around the world, and that's what's driving these big resorts and developers to come in because a lot of them are spending millions of dollars to market this valley. And that concerns a lot of people who live there.
That's what I was trying to, did you all hear what you're saying about the marketing taking place in Market Valley? I guess what I was saying is that's why nobody has a market on the vision. There are a lot of visions, and visions compete in the marketplace of ideas, and that's why I show some of the ads. I mean, there are people in our community spending a lot of money marketing their idea of what the future should be, and I don't have any way that I can call them up and say, you can't do that. All right, that's this whole freedom of speech and, you know, that kind of thing. So that's when these visions clash, and I guess you could, you know, I can see their roots of being rude tonight. They'll be rude to the people who come in, that'd be great. And you just, I don't know, I'm just kidding.
We have about 10 minutes left. We will be here for a little while after 8:30, but if we could get down towards this end.
Bring your examples, most of you, Aspen and Time City all started out as small communities. Do you assess impact fees from the developers? How did you minimize the impact on these small communities, the roads and schools and police?
Yeah, Joe, I have a question. How do you sort of handle the fiscal aspects of this?
Impact fees to developers?
Yes. And each community is different because each one has different laws. So Utah has different laws that we're allowed to do, and Park City has different laws in Crested Butte or Aspen or Telluride. Or, you know, so each place tries to come up with some smorgasbord of ideas that they can get away with in the sense that they can assess. But there are real costs to development, and your task will be to try to figure out what laws, what things you can ask for or demand. That's part of the task. I don't know what the laws are here. We talked some today with staff and county commission, and I think that's why I said about being entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial means that you push the envelope. You look and see what you can do to sit at the table and ask for the things that you think you need to ask for.
What are your impact fees?
Well, we have, you know, in Park City, for instance, we're constrained by state law too, but we have a resort city sales tax. We have sales tax number one. So we have a resort city sales tax, we have a transit tax, we have a room tax on transient occupancy. So anybody who's renting a room in Park City for less than 30 days pays 3%.
I mean, like an impact fee at the get-go, not...
We have impact fees we had an impact, we passed an impact fee for schools. 10 years ago, the legislature repealed that, passed a law specifically to take that away from us. And their argument was that it's a tax that makes housing less affordable, which it is. I mean, you know, but we said that someone's got to pay for this at some point. So, yes, we have to raise other taxes. I mean, there's no magic to this, right? Someone has to pay for the impacts one way or another. The impacts can be paid for by lessening services and not taking care of water, sewer, schools, open space, health. You know, someone has to manage the impacts. So we do have impact fees. We have impact fees for sewer. We have impact fees for recreation. we have a lot of different taxes in Park City that we put on annual sales tax. So, we have a pretty hefty property tax on second homes.
Yes, I think you're correct about what has been talked about in terms of trying to control the pace of development, and we all agree that we have to try and do that as best as we can. But when we're talking about taking great big steps, great huge steps like this proposed resort, I think that's where we can at least slow the pace of development. And one of the things that I think sets this particular development aside from others that have been proposed is that it's asking for huge subsidies of public resources. And as citizens, we all have a say in how those public resources are allocated. If we don't want to subsidize this particular development, that really should stand up and make our voices heard. One of the ways that the big subsidy is, of course, to use the Forest Service land. The other subsidy that's very important we should be heard on is the taking of water from Lolo Creek to create snow. And that's another area which we can resist. We think that we ought to leave that water in Lolo Creek and in the Bitterroot River for fish populations. We can oppose that subsidy.
That was a question.
Yeah.
Statement. So one or two more? Is that the night? Okay. Marcy? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
You talked a little bit about the regional impact of resort communities and how they kind of sprawl out. You talked about, do you have any good examples of how communities with several different governments have worked together to create a vision for the region?
For instance, what we've done in Park City, we've signed a big number now of intergovernmental MOUs, memorandums of understanding. And what that means is, basically we have reached out to our partners, to the other people who are affected by developments, and brought them into the process. We do that on a continuing basis. We have monthly meetings of the Intergovernmental Relations Group, which has representatives of the school district, the fire district, the two counties, the city, all those who kind of discuss on a regular basis what's going on in our community. It's not a be-all and end-all, because just because you sit at the table doesn't mean you have the power to affect the decision. Everyone has to, sort of see what their ticket says. And the county commissioners have one set of criteria, a school district might have another. But at least you're sharing, at least you're not blindsided. Our whole idea is not to blindside someone else and unwittingly stick them with a bill that they shouldn't get. So in that sense, we try hard to listen to what the various stakeholders and affected parties have to say and to take that into decisions affecting development. At the same time, we try to be pretty honest with ourselves about what the law says. I mean, our attorneys tell us, if you go too far, you're in a lawsuit. So, we have about 30 lawsuits against us at all times. We have a legal department of 6 lawyers. So are we in the legal business? Yeah, we're in the legal business. And we tell people we're suicide. We think we're doing things in the public interest, and we think we have a good reason to do that. And a lot of people say, we think you're wrong. And we say, okay, don't get your AK-47s, just sue us. So they do. So we spend a lot of money in lawsuits. We've been very successful in most of those lawsuits. So it just shows a will that we're trying to do the right thing. I'm just saying we live in a country where we try to balance interests. There's no formula that I can tell you how to balance those interests out. Simply, I think you try to be good neighbors, you ask the right questions, you get as much knowledge as you can, you try to do the best you can for the public. I know I made it sound inevitable, only because I was trying to show you what we've seen. It might get diverted at the Montana border and head over to the East Coast. I don't know. That would be very lucky. And maybe not. I try to say also, I love living in Park City. Park City today is a far better place for me than it was 20 years ago. And it's a far better place for many of the people who live in there. To answer your question, for the people who wasn't, they left. Some of them were forced out, but more of them sold out.
Because they couldn't pay the taxes.
No, not always because they couldn't pay the taxes. I've heard that a whole lot in my career, and generally, we have worked with old-time landowners and people on fixed incomes to give them tax rebates so that they're not forced out. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but a lot of the people, suddenly their house was worth, I was telling Patrick, we have a National Historic District in our downtown. Houses 15 years or 10 years ago were selling for $30,000. Some of those same shacks, and that's what they are selling for $3 million today. Those people willingly sold down. They could still be in those houses. They chose, I would choose too. Last question, or?
Two more, and then we have one here and one up there.
I'd rather hear the cows and smell them than to hear that traffic and smell that exhaust.
I don't blame you.
I've been here over 30 years too.
I understand. Last question.
Have you been hired to go see hired from
Have I been hired? No. I've never worked for a resort development in my career. No, I'm here from the county, from Missoula. No, I don't work for development.
Is the county on the resorts paying
Quite honestly, our goal at this meeting was to raise awareness that this is an issue and to get the community to start discussing the issue. Because something is going to change. What that change will be, we don't know yet. But we know it will occur, and it's time to have that discussion. That's why all three commissioners came. That's why Rural Initiative staff is here to listen, but also to initiate the dialogue. I want to thank Myles very much.
And thank you for coming. I mean, to me, this is so refreshing to